Well, good evening, everyone. It's almost Thanksgiving, and tonight's presenters are Maggie Grundy and Julia Coates, and our final storytelling project theme for 2020 is Giving Thanks. Maggie has found many, oh, you know what? I wasn't going to do that. Sorry, I got all ahead of myself. I want to let you know who our project presenters are. Primary Healthcare, the project is one of our presenters. Ames Public Library is also supporting this programming, the storytelling project, and clearly this is part of Ames Pride. I wanted to let everyone know that if you missed any of our previous events, they are closed captioned and up at our YouTube channel. And there are also other programs that were part of Pride Fest that aren't particularly storytelling project events up there as well. And then also just letting everyone know that the zine will be out in December. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that we have live captioning via Otter. You can go to the bottom of your screen and click on closed captions. And a second option would be to go to the top of your screen and click on the red live button, and that would open another internet window and provide you with captions. If you want to update your pronouns, you can right click on your name and type in your pronouns. So feel free to do that. You could even make up a new name if you want. And please use our chat tonight. I want to let you know we're monitoring that. We will be forwarding questions. Nikki Port and I will be asking questions on your behalf of Maggie and Julia, but we're also monitoring that just so that the conversations are all appropriate and on topic. So thanks for following along. Now I'm going to do my introductions. Tonight's presenters are Maggie Grundy and Julia Coates. Maggie has found many communities online that she's thankful for, learning about herself as she goes along. Her life's been a bit bumpy since this has been a lifelong process. She figures that sharing her story will be the best way to explain how profound finding these supportive communities has been for her. She'll be sharing her tale in hopes of inspiring others like her to reach out and find support and other communities that support them. Julia has been performing under the band name Free the Snakes for several years. The name started as a joke and still is. There is no deeper meaning. Please do not attempt to find one. She prefers to share her stories more through music, and we'll talk briefly about her songs throughout this evening's performance. And I want to welcome you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Make those go away, and you're on. Thank you.
Oh, all right, this is weird. I feel like I should like see some audience or something. It just doesn't feel like it's really happening. So hello, everyone. I can't really tell if there are people here or not, so I'm just going to talk it to the void as I am wont to do. So I'm going to give a disclaimer before I go into this. I want to stress that I don't claim to speak for everyone. Some of the topics I'm covering are unfortunately kind of hot button issues. I'm not a medical professional. I'm speaking only to my personal experience. So I'll be talking about neurodivergence broadly. I'm diagnosed with ADHD. I believe I might be autistic as well, but I've not been able to work with a professional to seek a diagnosis. Self-diagnosis is fairly accepted in the autistic community because diagnostic testing can be really difficult to access financially. Finding people to work with in your area, so distance can be an issue, and diagnostic testing can often be applied poorly. Because there are so many autistic and ADHD traits that are associated with maleness, AFAB people are often missed by this diagnostic criteria that currently exists in early childhood, and many autism diagnostic procedures require that you be diagnosed as a child. So I'll talk a little bit more about this with regards to my diagnosis, which suffers a similar gap in in diagnosis and go over some of these words a little bit more too. So another kind of before the talk, some possible content trigger warnings. I'm going to be talking about my life, and I'm going to be talking about death, abuse, substance abuse, particularly alcohol, suicide, and sexual assault. So please be aware if any of these topics are triggering to you. You might want to turn it off or have somebody else watch it first, let you know where the safe parts are. So I don't want to surprise anybody with that. So now I'm going to share some definitions, and Susan's going to pull up a PowerPoint here for you so you can kind of read along. I'm using Merriam-Webster definitions for as many things as I can, simply for consistency's sake. I don't know if all of these are 100% accurate or agreed on, but just a baseline understanding here. First one I'm going to talk about, content warnings and trigger warnings. So these are just statements cautioning that content may be disturbing or upsetting. Somehow this has become a cultural joke to some people. I think that's just confusingly callous. I don't know why it's hard to, or looked at as a funny or hard. If it's not hard to just warn people before you bring up traumatic things. So I just want to say that right off the bat. Trigger warnings are good things. Content warnings are good things. We should use them. We should respect them. So next one is neurodivergent. This one is not in the dictionary, but neurodiverse and neurotypical are. So when I say neurodivergent, this is what I'm talking about. And so neurodivergent or neurodiverse, relating to or constituting a type of brain functioning that is not neurotypical. So here we have neurotypical, not affected with a developmental disorder, especially autism spectrum disorder, exhibiting or characteristic of typical neurological development. So another caveat here, there is a disagreement among the autistic and broader neurodivergent community about the use of the term, quote, disorder. I personally prefer divergent, but I do consider neurodivergence to be a, quote, disorder in the sense that it's extremely difficult to survive under our callous system. We tend to pathologize any divergence from the norm, so it punishes those who aren't able to produce and function in the ways expected of neurotypical people. Because we're held to this kind of unreachable, impossible standard, we are therefore considered disordered and disabled by society's standards, not necessarily our own. And next one is toxic positivity. I'm sure people have encountered this one. So this is kind of my own definition here. It's not in the dictionary, but I think this toxic positivity has emerged from a societal aversion to vulnerability. So in sharing our feelings of despair, hopelessness, fear, etc., we remind others of their own struggles. And there's this kind of belief that expressing emotions is negative and is going to make things worse. So someone might think they're being helpful when they tell a person that's confiding in them their feelings that they need to be grateful for what they have or look on the bright side and stay positive. I'm going to just say no one in the history of depression has ever been cured by someone telling them to stay positive and try yoga. I am willing to bet on this. So on the other hand, validation and understanding actually make people feel better. So I think as a society that we're very afraid of perpetuating this negativity and feeding into negative moods, and it kind of backfires. Sometimes when we try to help people feel better by giving them toxic positive advice, we just end up kind of compounding this helplessness people feel, and it comes off as dismissive instead of understanding. So I could rant about this for a long time, but that's not my main thing today, so I'm not gonna do that. The next thing I'm gonna talk about is stimming. Stimming is a self-stimulatory behavior marked by repetitive action or movement of the body, such as repeatedly tapping on objects or the ears, snapping fingers, blinking the eyes, rocking from side to side, which I'll probably do this whole time, or grunting. It's typically associated with certain conditions, such as autism spectrum disorder. And a note that I want to make here that this does not say, stimming is a self-soothing behavior. So a lot of autistic people with ADHD, like myself, have a lot of sensory sensitivity. So if like lights are too bright, sound is too painful, your skin's feeling itchy, we stim kind of unconsciously to self-soothe. And these behaviors are looked at by neurotypical people as intrusive or distracting or annoying or whatever. So that will bring me to my next point of just definition, which is masking, another one that's not in the dictionary. This is the societally enforced expectation that neurodivergent people mask their differences and pretend to be neurotypical. So, you know, you can imagine people that you've seen in your life maybe like shaking their knee or something during class and the teacher yells at them. That's traumatic. When we stim, we are self-soothing. So being forced not to stim is really harmful. It's really exhausting. And, you know, when we don't realize we're doing it and we're being chastised, this really relates and lends itself to just kind of, for me, chronic fatigue. So once I learned about masking and started trying to allow myself to drop it, I felt much less tired. So we're going to also talk about identity first versus person first language. So this is kind of another spot where neurotypical people try to speak for neurodivergent people. There are neurodivergent people who prefer person first language, but overwhelmingly I've encountered people who prefer identity first language. So this means autistic rather than saying person with autism. There's the kind of neurotypical idea that, oh, you're not defined by your neurology, you're not defined by your disability, and them kind of trying to tell us how to self-identify. So this is also kind of that toxic positivity. You know, neurotypical people kind of take it as like, I'm putting myself down when I talk about being ADHD, or I'm saying something bad about myself if I talk about fatness, or I'm, you know, if someone's like in a wheelchair and you want to tell them, oh, well, your wheelchair doesn't define you. We don't get to decide that for them. So that's something that I want to talk about a lot, is just don't tell other people how they should refer to themselves. Respect people's identities, and then for that matter, pronouns, same deal. Just respect people's self-identity. Another thing I want to talk about briefly is ABA. It stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. ABA is, I'm going to say, quote unquote, a treatment for autism created by the same guy who developed gay conversion therapy. I feel like that's all I need to say about it to make it pretty clear that it is abuse disguised as therapy. It forces autistic people to mask, teaches them their natural movements, speech or lack thereof, stimming, anything else that makes them stand out from their neurotypical peers are bad and wrong. I'm sure many practitioners of ABA want to help, but in the same way that toxic positivity can be harmful, ABA is more concerned about making life easier for the parents of autistic children. It is not concerned with the emotional well-being of autistic people themselves. Some people will call it dog training for children. And recently I read something that said, it's from a dog trainer, it's not dog training. We treat dogs better than ABA treats autistic children. It's overwhelmingly hated by the autistic community. I think a report I read recently said something like 97% of autistic people think very negatively of it. You can look up the hashtag actually autistic if you want more info about that. But I want to take up my platform here to denounce ABA. Next thing is AFAB and AMAB. Oop, I'm not taking that one out. But if that's not in there, or oh, I think I just added EMDR. So AFAB, AMAB, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. Cultural socialization and gender roles and expectations also play a role in how our behavior is perceived. Many AFAB children are missed by autism and ADHD diagnostic testing because they don't exhibit the same behaviors that AMAB children do. Society has decided our girls are conditioned, I think, practically from birth to be quiet and submissive. So we're extra primed to hide our stims and mask our symptoms, which causes us to slide under the radar. So when thinking back to ABA, this major quote, therapy for autism is only concerned about whether or not autistic people show their symptoms or express emotions and or behaviors considered to be atypical. With this logic, Why bother diagnosing a child who may be autistic or ADHD but masks well? They consider the diagnosis itself to be harmful and let people flounder for their whole lives while also telling them they aren't trying hard enough. There's no way they could possibly be autistic or have ADHD. So this leads a whole bunch of people to grow up as troubled teens, they're looked at, until receiving a bipolar or borderline personality disorder diagnosis that may not quite fit. It is possible to be comorbid, you could have both, but overwhelmingly AFAB people are misdiagnosed or have their neurodivergent symptoms just completely ignored because of this kind of thing. I also want to note that in the autistic community, Black autistic people are often ignored. Just as autism is seen as a male trait, it is also seen as a white trait. So we really need to do more to dispel these myths that autism is like a white male thing. We're just as varied as neurotypicals. This is a really important thing that people need to be aware of and talking about. And let's see, I think I had EMDR, maybe we can go back to that one. EMDR therapy, it's I think it's sort of still experimental. I think it's based on neuroscience. I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail about it. I put a link here in the presentation. I think we can share. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. So it's developed for PTSD, and it's a kind of therapy that I did, but I'm just going to touch on briefly, and I don't want to kind of go into it while I'm talking about it. So that's what that is. I found it really helpful, but not quite the focus of the talk tonight. So other thing I think I have on here is CPTSD, I think is the last one. This one is also kind of not in the DSM. So CPTSD is kind of a shorthand that some of us with PTSD have developed and started using just to kind of explain that this is a kind of PTSD that develops over time of sustained trauma, not necessarily a specific event that causes PTSD. And there is a lot of overlap with CPTSD and neurodivergence. So I'll go into that a little more later. So that's pretty much my definitions here. Like Susan said tonight, I want to tell my story in the hopes that it might be helpful for someone. I spent a lot of my life feeling kind of like an alien, like just bouncing around in the dark. So I feel like the last 20 years of my life have been one big research project, trying to figure myself out. So I've got a list here of things that other people have decided about me, that they have told me that these are my labels and my traits. So they've said I'm obsessed with myself, that I'm actually normal, but I just want to be different. If I'm really neurodivergent, I must be high functioning. I need to stop complaining. I'm focusing too much on the negative and therefore responsible for my depression, my anxiety. I'm too sensitive, I'm dramatic. And then most ironically, I need to stop labeling myself and go with the flow, man. So that's toxic positivity. So why is it that so many people want to tell me who I am, but also scold me for seeking labels to find other people like me and help myself be understood by people that obviously don't understand me? So because of this pervasive attitude, I've kind of spent my life bouncing around between being very open, doing stuff like I'm doing now, and kind of receding into self-conscious isolation. So I've had some pretty big light bulb moments in my life that have led me to understanding, acceptance, and community. In my teenage years and my 20s, I never could have even imagined the kind of love and support that I have now, both from other people and from myself to myself. I decided to be kind of defiantly open about what was going on behind the scenes in my brain, as much as it sometimes invites very mean criticism. I think just being kind of defiantly myself, I've seen it be helpful to others, and just the happiness that I get out of knowing I'm helping somebody out there is way better than hiding. So I'm going to keep doing it. But all those things people told me about myself over the years kind of converted into my self-talk without realizing it. So, after years of research and therapy and finding all these amazing, inspiring and knowledgeable people on the internet, has helped me kind of self-actualize. And it took me a really long time to be kind to myself and to kind of sift out what was insight and what was negative self-talk. So I am still sometimes burdened by that. Sometimes I don't catch myself before it's a little too late, and I might need to spend a day or two kind of in the fog, as I call it. But I do always bounce back, and I just do my best to keep picking myself up every day and try to allow myself some grace on those foggy days and just take a rest. So that brings me to the beginning of my actual story. I'm gonna take a minute here and make sure everything's good. There's no like questions or anything. All right. Okay, so buckle up. I grew up in an alcoholic home. I did not notice anything was wrong until about 5th grade. And then from then on, it felt like I was never allowed a moment of emotional stability. Every time things would feel calm, they would blow up again. I developed severe anxiety and depression. Outside of my home, I was constantly bullied, seemingly everywhere I went. Felt like I had a target on my head. When I finally came out of my shell to people, I would get too excitable and people would get annoyed and kind of ostracize me. People started calling me a lesbo for, I don't know why. Then I tried to come out as bisexual when I was in middle school. And my mom was just like, believe me, honey, I wish I didn't like men too. Am I right? But you're not bisexual. She just didn't believe me at all. She didn't listen to me until about 20 years later. I was sobbing to her about it, and it kind of sunk in. But then I discovered a few years after high school that someone I had considered a close friend had been spreading rumors about me that I was a lesbian. And because of this, she thought that meant and told people that I was going to molest her because I was gay. At the same time, though, everyone was telling me I was pretending to be bisexual because I wanted attention. So I think the compulsory heterosexuality in our culture causes LGBTQIA+ individuals to be viewed as predators. Our divergence from the norm causes fear, and out of this fear comes this cruel association with perversion. When we grow up queer, we're conditioned to see ourselves as somehow dangerous and doing something wrong. Other people are conditioned to see us as potential threats. Every time I tried to explore my sexuality, I'd be bombarded by people from all directions telling me I was not bi, I was not queer enough, I was not straight enough, I was just weird. So I went back to the closet very hard for many years. The first time I saw a psychiatrist, I was about 18. My dad had just died due to liver failure, which surprised no one. I told her about my dad's alcoholism and my family's struggles, and she immediately marked me as drug seeking, referred me to a psychologist who did not diagnose or prescribe. So after a few weeks, the psychologist, who I loved, told me she thought I had ADHD, but I was too scared to bring it up to my regular doctor because I was already on Xanax for panic disorder. This was the first thing that I have ever found to actually help my panic attacks, and I was really scared they would label me as drug seeking too and take me off my meds. So during this time, I was dating someone that was verbally abusive. We had both experienced a lot of trauma and we bonded over this. It was very unhealthy. The next 7 years or so have kind of a painful, hazy fog. I don't remember a whole lot. Sometimes it kind of comes to me in waves. This experience, coupled with my upbringing and the bullying, gave me chronic PTSD. So PTSD and ADHD mimic each other and overlap in many ways. So if my psychologist at this point hadn't suggested ADHD as a possibility, I probably never would have recognized it underneath all the trauma. So fast forward about another 10-ish years, along this way, I discovered alcohol myself. I discovered that it muted this kind of constant stream of chatter in my head. So most of the time, it kind of feels like there's a theater of people, there's just a lot of murmuring kind of all the time in the back of my head. And when I realized that alcohol stopped that, it was a little dangerous. I discovered later that my meds that I take for ADHD do the same thing, which is amazing. But I just learned at this point, drinking allowed me to think clearly, which is kind of backwards, I guess. It allowed me to open up, to be myself. I discovered people liked me, that I was funny, I could get up on stage, I could perform. Then I experienced more trauma, and I kind of lost my relationship with alcohol and turned to it in a really bad way. I was drinking way too much. So that was another thing that made it hard to recognize ADHD. So at this time, I was in grad school. Thanks to Access and AIMS, I was able to escape the abusive situation I was in. Access is just amazing. They did so much for me. I never thought it was possible to free myself from that, but they did a lot, and I will be forever thankful. Unfortunately, I did still end up homeless. So I had some really good friends that took me in for a bit, but I could not afford to live, and I could not afford to keep going to grad school. Then my ex started sending me messages describing what I looked like in public places. So I took a leave of absence and I moved to Texas from Iowa and lived with my mom for a bit. So somehow I managed to tie up all these loose ends and get things kind of taken care of, and was able to go back to grad school. But it still kind of felt like I couldn't get my shit together. I was so ready to do this, and it felt really good, but I just could not, as hard as I tried, could not put the amount of work in that I needed to. I still had a pretty toxic relationship with alcohol as well. At this time, I started remembering some conversations I'd had with my dad, and I talked to my mom about it. She said that she and my father were both pretty sure that he had ADHD. He was also dyslexic. He had frequently mentioned drinking to quiet that brain noise. So when I had said that to my mom, she was like, well, interesting. So with this information, I decided to do some investigating, and I found like a box full of all my old report cards. So pretty much all of them said something like, great student, if only she would apply herself, if only she would work a little bit harder. And they all talked about how messy my workspace, my desk, and my backpack always were. I had loose papers everywhere. I would interrupt. When I look back, I remember being very anxious and quiet, but there were also times where I would get super excitable and distracting. And then I would burst into tears if anybody even acted like they were the slightest bit upset with me. Which is another one that's kind of like, is that trauma? Is that neurodivergence? Who knows? With all of this information, I took a deep breath. I decided to try again to talk to a psychiatrist. So it is really hard to get a doctor to listen to you about having ADHD, especially when you're in college, especially having a family history of substance abuse, especially having so much trauma in my life. It's easy to see now why most of my doctors immediately wrote me off as just, well, they have severe depression, duh. They have anxiety, yes, maybe, and then they would call it mild bipolar disorder, maybe it's borderline personality disorder, but I never quite checked all the boxes. When I finally brought all this up to my doctor, she gave me just this like giant survey thing to fill out. She said the psychiatrist would not even see people until they were screened, because this college, they're gonna screen everybody because people abuse ADHD medicine. So I understand why it was like that, but it's also just kind of hilariously ironic that getting an ADHD diagnosis requires so much organized jumping through hoops. That's not something we're good at. So it took me 30 years. So I filled this paperwork out, tried really hard to mention everything I could think of that indicated ADHD, and to my surprise, he accepted me as a patient. So my memory is a blur, I have mentioned. So I don't remember exactly how our first appointments went, but he ended up diagnosing me with ADHD. He did not specify a type, and started me on meds, which changed my life drastically. I still struggled, but at least sitting down and doing the work that I loved and wanted to work on anyway was no longer something that I had to fight to get maybe a couple hours a week of hyper focus, I could just take my medicine and do it when I needed to. So another quick note, there are 3 types of ADHD. They used to call it ADD and ADHD and combo. So the latter being hyperactive and the former being inattentive. So now they're all ADHD, but it's inattentive ADHD, hyperactive ADHD, and combo. So I think I'm combo, but this also ties into why AFAB people are so often missed with diagnoses, or AMAB people who are inattentive. So hyperactive is what everybody thinks about when we think of ADHD. So the daydreamers like me are just looked at as lazy. And especially if you do okay kind of naturally in school, it's extra like, well, you're just, I know you can do it. Why aren't you? And that really compounds the trauma too, because you're like just full of just constant feeling bad about yourself for not being able to perform at the level that seems to be expected of you. So here's where we're going to get into some extra trigger warning trauma stuff here. So just warning. In my second, I think, year of grad school, really, really loved one close friend killed himself. And this was like a big tipping point for me. I can't remember if my diagnosis came before or after this, but teasing out what was trauma and what was neurodivergency became a big focus of mine. There are theories that all neurodivergent people are traumatized by the very nature of growing up in a society that discriminates against us and treats us as broken and not quite fully human, which could also explain some of this overlap. That's something I research a lot and I'm interested in. During this time, I also started therapy and did EMDR, which I really liked. So I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but I just wanted to make a note that I do actively work on my trauma. I'm not just explaining it away as just all ADHD. I know that those things have affected me, and I found EMDR to be super duper helpful. So after I started taking meds, I still struggled, but I had a much easier time. I still struggled with drinking for a few years, but after I graduated, my girlfriend and I moved up to Minneapolis. We started working on some stuff. And it became less and less of a thing for me. I found it much easier to just have like a little bit, just have a glass of wine or something. I realized I didn't have this screaming voice anymore. And yeah, I was just able to self-soothe in other ways. And now that I know about ADHD, now that I know about stimming, I can just do that stuff. And it's amazing how much less stressed I feel. And then more recently, I started reading about autism and just feeling like someone is in my, how did you get in my brain? Like the more I read, the more I relate. But when I finally mustered the courage to bring it up to somebody close to me, they laughed and said, well, you must be high functioning. And it really felt like a molten knife in my gut, because I just couldn't believe someone who knew me so well could look at my life and look at how much I struggle and think that I was just like skating through like easily. Every day is a huge challenge. Another friend was actually angry at me when I first started talking about it, because she'd only known autistic people who need a high level of assistance. So to her, it seemed like I was trivializing autism. So, but once I talked to her, explained that autism is a spectrum, and gave her some of my information, she really understood and became just like an even more awesome ally. So the reason I want to do stuff like this is for that very reason. I want to spread this information in hopes that other neurodivergent people can be better understood by the people around them. I want to put this stuff out there so that people like me will see, hey, there's somebody like me talking on the internet. Whoa. And so I'm just gonna keep talking and keep doing, and keep learning about myself, keep learning about other people. One of the things that really helped with that was finding online communities. And I've always been into online communities since I was a kid. I feel like I'm pretty sure I invented blogs, just saying. But when I was a kid, we made blogs, we made personal websites, and we made these web rings, and we'd share them. And this was in like 1999, you know, this was way before Facebook. And you know, it occurred to me more recently, like, God, the internet, I mean, we all know the internet can be like a toxic wasteland, let's be real, but so is like not the internet. So just like in person, we can kind of carve out our safe places. We can do that on the internet too. And I have found amazing community in neurodivergent groups, disabled groups, queer groups. I came out, I think this year as non-binary, so I'm using they, them pronouns now. And I'm bisexual, and that's something that I, you know, like have said, I've tried to talk about before, and I'm always met with all this resistance and like, I don't know why other people are so concerned about my self-identity. So I'm just gonna resist, you know, the urge to kind of hide and keep being myself very openly and taking up that space. One of the things more recently that's come out, I live in Minneapolis, so we moved here last year. So in May, May, when George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police, our community came together for each other, and it's still happening. Neurodivergent people, neurotypical people, queer, straight, transgender, cis, non-binary, white, black, we make our own families. We take care of each other. We don't have to settle for abusive relationships. We can look into our community and find mutual aid networks. If you can't find one, you can make your own. It's as simple as helping your friend pay their rent when you're doing well. I think society can pit us against each other, and we have this kind of resistance to just giving our buds money. Just give them, if you got money, give your friend some money. Like, we got to help each other. I think it's a radical act of defiance to take care of your neighbors. I found in these like mutual aid groups, like my back went out and I needed a chair, and somebody like that day was like, I have a chair, and they brought it to me. If you've got extra clothes, we do like a lot of like transgender like clothes swaps and stuff, and there's just so many people out there, and we can all help each other. So I guess my biggest kind of takeaway, like, it took me a really, really long time to find myself underneath my trauma. One of those discoveries is that I'm neurodivergent. Also, my gender identity, sexuality as well. I choose my own labels. I do not let other people foist them upon me. I hope that the current generation of kids growing up hear people like me and feel less alone. We get knocked down a lot in life, but we have the power to pick each other back up. We can drop the toxic and just have the positive. So that's my rant. I hope that everyone watching feels like they have safe people they can talk to. If you need a safe person to talk to, you can find me on the internet. I'm always happy to help. I hope that people can find communities that speak to them, and, you know, either receive help or give help, and we can all help each other, because the way things are make it pretty hard. You know, we can't do this alone. We need each other. So that's that. I'm gonna stop rambling. That's it. Any questions?
Wow, Maggie, thank you for sharing and making yourself so vulnerable to all of us. I've noticed Nikki does a really good job of finding key words and phrases that she's been kind of amplifying in the chat.
Oh, nice.
I don't necessarily see a question right now. Maybe folks could think about that. If you want to transition to music, we could follow up with some questions.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna music now. I'm gonna move my recording, and we're gonna take like 2 minutes. Julia's gonna run to the bathroom.
Well, maybe then we should come up with a question for you. So I know what I was thinking about when you were talking about identity first labels.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if I was just referring to a person, is there a default?
I would not say there is a default. It's one of those things that everyone's different. I think, kind of like pronouns, you just kind of have to ask what people
Right.
prefer.
Yeah.
I would say like I default to autistic rather than person with autism. I think that's just a matter of just, if you're invited into those spaces, one of those things to just kind of listen a little bit and
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it kind of depends on the situation. Like if you're doing like a talk, or if you want to reference the community, I think autistic community is acceptable. But that's something I would kind of reach out and get like a pool of opinions on.
Right. Or alternate if you're not sure. In a more general sense or something.
This is one of those things that I will say, as far as what I've seen, almost everyone that I've seen come in and correct people and say, no, you have to say person with autism. Every time I've seen that, it has been a person who calls themselves an ally or a parent of someone with autism. So, or a parent of an autistic child. So I have never seen that from an autistic person. That doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that feel that way, but
sure. Well, that's good to know.
Largely, I think identity first language is preferred.
Cool. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And we did have someone ask if you could talk a little bit more about EMDR.
Sure. So EMDR, I think it's a little controversial as far as how it works. So my understanding of it, as my therapist talked to me, is that it's based on neuroscience. And this is gonna sound, this is totally layman's, like, I don't know. It's when we experience trauma, apparently the memory of it does not get fully processed on both sides of the brain. It kind of gets stuck. So what EMDR does is it supposedly activates each side of the brain as you kind of talk about or think about your trauma, which allows it to fully process through both sides of the brain. So it does this through either you can hold like a little buzzer in each hand and it kind of alternates the buzz, or I did it with headphones on and it beeps in each ear alternating, but there's also one that I think flashes a light left and right like that. And so, according to some neuroscientists, this kind of left-right thing helps traumatic memories to kind of fully process. And I don't know how much of that is accurate, like scientifically sound, but I will say just from my own experience that it was really helpful. And I do feel like it worked. So I will warn people before trying it. I do know some people who experience just very severe emotional fallout from the process. So if you're going to try it, I would recommend having a like serious support group going on. I would recommend talking to your boss or your teachers or whatever. Maybe do it during a time where you can have a couple of weeks off. I know that's not super feasible for everybody, but I know that you're kind of taking this, pin out of your trauma, and it's very likely going to come kind of cascading out. So I feel like it would be irresponsible of me not to say something about that. So that's
sure.
my EMDR spiel.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That sounds like it was really effective, and someone else agreeing in the chat. So
awesome. Good. So I suppose, okay, we got like 15, 20 minutes. So we're just going to play some songs, and Julia wants to talk about some stuff. That's totally cool. If not, I will not make her. But thank you everybody for listening, and we'll just kind of play you out, I think.
Yay.
I'm going to move my mic. So here. So please tell me if it's sound is weird. see us okay?
All right. So we are Free the Snakes. As I said in our intro, that's serious. You know, I'm not saying like don't ask me what it means, but like there's not really a point. You know, it's a fruitless search. This first song is called Lukewarm Takes. I figure I talk a little bit about them afterwards. I know we're a little far on time, so I'll try and keep those like short, but.
And you're on whenever you'd like.
All right. Awesome. Something to say about everything. Come on, play the lukewarm takes. And if you wanted to know what I think about it, I say everyone's wrong, or maybe everyone's right. Looked up some new words on the internet. Now I consider myself an egalitarian, but yet I secret baby, I don't really say what I mean. Now don't you ever try to tell me something I'm saying is that true? Don't you ever try to tell me something I'm saying is that right? Just got 3 words I will answer you with. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. All the new tragedies will bury my head in the sand. Pretend like everything's fine. And if you tell me of all the calamities, I'll dig up some fucking blog who says it didn't occur. That's checkmate, 'cause I think I'm winning when I make you so fucking mad. You lose the power to speak, but yet I secret, baby, I don't really say what I mean. Don't you ever try to tell me something I'm saying is that right? Don't you ever try to tell me something I'm saying is that true? Just got 3 words I will answer you with. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Have you heard of Antifa? I heard they broke a window and ain't that a crime? And have you heard of the kids in the border building? They still break the laws. Little kids broke the law. There's 2 sides to every argument, but I'd decide what the sides are. I'll let you in on a secret, baby. I don't really mean what I say. Now don't you ever try to tell me something I'm saying is that right? Don't you ever try to tell me something I'm saying is that true? Just got 3 words I will answer you with. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Ooh, I'm just saying. Oh, thank you, thank you.
What was the name of that song?
Lukewarm Takes is the name of that song. That,
Perfect.
neologism. I see the word written but not used. It is a word I made up. It's like hot takes on the internet, you know? Hot takes either ironic or right. When you have something really spicy and also correct to say, usually something critical. This is kind of about the opposite of that, or about people thinking they're doing that, but so you know about this whole arguing on the internet. People take on this posture in a lot of situations where either, well, there's 2 sides to that, or either, well, I, see beyond the conflict of these sides. I don't have enemies with
Galaxy
anyone.
brain.
And so there's like, I think, people, especially now, I think it's older than this, but, it's just like becoming kind of extra serious feeling and frightening under Trumpism, because, like, I am being silly about this one, and it is really fun to just like dunk on this like image of this person we've all encountered who's some kind of know-it-all, who the whole reason they say they're smarter than you is that they don't have an opinion or whatever. Really irritating. But like, I wrote this one after having a really vicious fight about the concentration camps at the border with a person who just kept telling me like, it starts with the like, oh, they broke the law though, and then it just ended, and towards the end they would just keep doing this. I just don't care. That just doesn't stir my feelings, and so like, this kind of not even having a position against, it's like you're wrongly upset, and that's the whole thing, and it's silly, but it's also kind of like proto brown shirt behavior, like if you don't have any feelings when the government just causes people to die, then that's how
It
you
doesn't
train.
make you a
Yeah.
good centrist.
So anyway, like I said, I'm trying to keep the descriptions fairly brief, so I could talk about rhetoric on the internet, and especially that of like the alt-right and whatever, but
It's about 7, I think.
it's about 7? Oh my.
Oh,
Well,
6:53.
let's move on.
We'll do another song.
Let's move on.
We're good.
So I think I fixed the sound. It should be better now, hopefully.
So this next one's called Taking a Walk. It is, I guess like all these, I played a bunch of the Vinyl Grind open mic, if anyone was coming to that, was listening. I
Shout out
assume the
Vinyl
answer is-
Grind.
The once and future will always be with us. Anyway. I'm taking a walk in the place where I live, and kinda suddenly I'm feeling something strange, inexplicably. Like I don't know where I All right.
I hit the wall with my bow a couple of times.
Ooh.
Didn't hear it or see it. Well,
Okay.
thank you. That was awesome. That was awesome. So, someone was just wanting to clarify the name of your first song. Was it Lukewarm Takes?
Yes.
Is
Yes. Oh.
lukewarm one or two words?
Oh, I write it as one, but I've never really looked up if that's
think it's
like
one.
correct. That's
Yeah,
that's it's written as one in all
it
my
works
set
for me.
lists.
Yeah. Oh, that was awesome. Thank
Thank
I needed some live music, well, live on a Saturday night. Oh, well, thank you. This was our last storytelling project of the year, and this will also be captioned by ours truly, Maggie, and put on the Ames Pride YouTube page sometime in the future. Let's not put any pressure on Maggie right now. And but if you want to refer someone to hear her really inspiring story, and such a story of perseverance, and really finding yourself in a really beautiful way. So I did also want to ask Maggie and Julia to not go away as we close. So
Yeah.
yeah, so well, thank you all, and be well, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Lots of thanks in the chat.